If you're new to the Pokemon TCG, Gardevoir EX needs no introduction. This card has been a metagame staple since day one of its release, and with 5 other Pokemon in its evolution line being useful in their own ways, it placed second at the 2023 World Championships, played by the game's best and most decorated active player. However, in April 2025, it looked like Gardevoir was dead in the water. It had, at this point, lost all of its key evolutionary line pieces and looked to be a struggling archetype in a brand new post-rotation format. And then it won the largest regional of all time and the largest Pokemon tournament ever. And it somehow just also won the 2025 World Championships. This shouldn't be possible. Sure, we've seen some decks with major longevity and high peaks similar to Gardevoir. Mew VMAX is the obvious recent example, but actually Mew and Gardevoir are polar opposites in how Pokemon has treated them. Mew received several dedicated counter cards and nerfs, like Drapion V, Spiritomb, Mightyena, and numerous Dark-type attackers such as Charizard EX, Roaring Moon EX, and Darkrai V-Star, but it didn't work. However, with Gardevoir, Pokemon seems to have a different approach for balancing it. Instead of printing counterplay for the deck in the form of tech cards, they keep buffing it almost every set. In the upcoming Mega Evolution expansion, for example, Gardevoir will receive 2 massive buffs that, looking at where the deck is right now, it's safe to say it did not need. So today, I'm going to break it all down for you guys. Why Gardevoir is so good, why it has stayed so good for over 2 years, and why Pokemon keeps buffing one of the greatest decks of all time. Gardevoir EX released in the Scarlet and Violet base set in March 2023, which coincided with the rotation of key players in the type special energies, amazing rare Pokemon, ordinary rods, scoop up net, quick ball, and many more. Gardevoir EX has the ability Psychic Embrace, which allows the user to attach infinite psychic energy from the discard pile to their psychic Pokemon in any way they like, but at the cost of putting 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. However, this damage placement actually becomes a positive for the deck, but more on that guy later. Its attack Miracle Force does a respectable 190 damage and heals all status conditions from the user, which isn't that big of a deal, but still a cool bonus. This 2-shot everything in the game for 3 energy on a 310 HP 2-prize Pokemon. So this attack is definitely good. This card on paper doesn't appear broken, and in reality it isn't. The broken aspects of the Gardevoir deck mostly come from the support Pokemon and other evolution Pokemon in its arsenal. First, but least important, are the Ralts. Memory Skip Ralts provides great extra utility against decks with few switching cards like Charizard EX, but the 60 HP was a huge liability, and Lost Mine Sableye and Phantom Dive Dragapult running around made it less optimal. The 70 HP Teleportation Burst Ralts not only had better HP, but eventually also a better attack versus the infamous Snorlax Stall deck, so your Ralts weren't a sitting duck to get trapped in the active spot. However, the most important evolution Pokemon in the deck are undoubtedly Kirlia. This Kirlia from Chilling Reign has the Mirage Step attack, which searches the deck for 3 Kirlia and benches them, skipping the evolution step. This was unbelievably good, as one of, if not the best card in the entire deck was this Kirlia from Silver Tempest. Refinement lets you discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. This was the engine of the Gardevoir deck. Get a few Ralts down, level ball for Mirage Step into 3 Refinement Kirlia, and start refining away psychic energy and drawing cards. The big attacker of the deck came with this Gardevoir from Chilling Reign, with the Shining Arcana ability. This was basically a free draw too, but if any of the top 2 cards are psychic energy, or any basic energy, you can attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. This is incredible, not only providing more card draw, but also extra ways to attach energy for its attack Brainwave, which does 60 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to Gardevoir, which could scale up to 330 for 9 energy, which is unrealistic with only basic energy, but the next set would provide the solution to that. Radiant Greninja slotted in perfectly to draw cards and as an extra way to discard Psychic Energy for Psychic Embrace. This Drifloon also released in Scarlet and Violet with the Balloon Blast attack, doing 30 damage for each damage counter on it for 2 Psychic Energy. Later on, this and the Bravery Charm tool card released in the same set would become a staple in the Gardevoir archetype and arguably its most powerful attacker. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, Gardevoir is already really good. However, it was missing a bit of firepower right off the bat, with Shining Arcana Gardevoir not doing enough damage. However, players discovered that this Zacian V from Celebrations not only enabled Forest Seal Stone and Sky Seal Stone as options, but it also provided an easy one-hit KO attacker for anything in the game, with an attack as strong as Gardevoir but with higher HP, meaning you could attach more Psychic Energy to it, meaning you could do more damage. The first tournament Gardevoir EX was legal for was the Champions League Aichi in 2023, where it placed both 2nd and 7th. The second place list incorporated all of Gardevoir's best tools, with 3 copies of Judge for disruption, Sky Seal Stone as a way for Zacian to take 4 prizes, and Cresselia as attack for the Lost Box matchup with its attack removing damage from your board, which was great against Sableye's Lost Mine attack that was dominating the game and ultimately won the same tournament. Still, for his first tournament, this is a great showing, especially for a very new and unexplored archetype. The first TPCI event the deck was legal for was EUIC 2023, a perfect opportunity to prove itself on the big stage, and it did just that. Tord Reklev placed 2nd, and there were 5 Gardevoir in the top 32. 3 of which also played Mewtwo V Union, a superpowered attacker that had great synergy with Kirlia. Gardevoir was on the map as a top tier archetype right off the bat, but it was only up from here. After several more great results at Majors, Paldea Evolved released right before NAIC 2023, and gave Gardevoir some of its best tools. Super Rod meant you could actually recover your Pokemon consistently. For reference, Gardevoir was playing this supporter card Miriam as their form of Pokemon recovery, and it's safe to say Super Rod is much better. Iono is one of the best Pokemon cards of all time, and a perfect fit in Gardevoir. This card has been an auto 4 of in Gardevoir for over 2 years, and it's easy to see why, as its combination of disruption and early game draw support was a perfect fit in a deck like Gardevoir that could win games off the back of disruption, especially versus decks that hated having their hand disrupted like Lost Box and Miraidon, which could be tough matchups. The Artisan Stadium card searches the deck for a basic non-rule box Pokemon and benches it, which was great in Gardevoir as not only more ways to bump pesky Path to the Peak that could turn off Psychic Embrace, but also as more outs to basics on turn 1. The last big buff from this set was the Reversal Energy, a special energy that provided 3 energy of any type, but only on a non-rule box evolution Pokemon, and only if that player had more prize cards remaining than the opponent. In simpler terms, this meant that if you are losing the game, it provides 3 rainbow energies on a stage 1 or stage 2 that isn't a Pokemon EX. This became an instant 1 of at least, sometimes even a 2 or 3 of in Gardevoir, since it synergized not only with Shining Arcana Gardevoir, allowing you to take one-shots you otherwise couldn't, but also with the natural playstyle of the deck, being slow and methodical, using Refinement over and over multiple turns while you slowly aimed to build up a monstrous board state that couldn't be beat. With these massive buffs, Gardevoir placed both 3rd and 4th at NAIC 2023, a great and respectable showing for sure, but it wasn't done there. Tord Reklev was, and probably still is, the best player in the world. And going into the 2023 World Championships, it was no surprise that he placed his bets of winning his first Worlds title on the back of arguably the most skill-intensive deck in the game outside of Lost Box. The deck had so many small decisions and resources that had to be managed and perfected. Tord made it all the way to the finals with a nearly perfect list, just barely losing in a close set to Mew VMAX. Still, for its first World Championships, Gardevoir put on a show and won the hearts of many casual players. There were so many cool plays the deck could make, whether it be Zacian V taking 4 prize cards on a VMAX to win the game, double reversal energy on a Shining Arcana Gardevoir blowing up the opponent, or the classic Iono plus attack that spelled doom for so many decks in the format. Some would argue this was the peak of Gardevoir, but they hadn't seen anything yet. Obsidian Flames was more or less a net negative for Gardevoir. While it did gain the buff and option of Cleffa, it also gained a rough matchup with Charizard EX, a dark type that could one-shot Gardevoir no matter what. However, Paradox Rift was one of the best sets, if not possibly the very best set for Gardevoir, and not saying something considering how good Paldea Evolved was for it. Counter Catcher was reprinted, A once solid card in the Sun and Moon era was here in Scarlet and Violet, and it instantly became a format staple. In a deck like Gardevoir that already had so much draw power, drawing into the deadly combo of Counter Catcher plus Iono was easy and could win you games very quickly, especially since the nature of the deck was starting to look like a comeback deck due to Reversal Energy and Iono. This was a great, easy inclusion. Earthen Vessel looked like it was made for Gardevoir, discarding one card from your hand and adding 2 basic energy from the deck to your hand. One problem with Gardevoir before was how difficult it could be to draw into enough psychic energy to attack, but Vessel was great at helping with this and would eventually become a guaranteed 3 of in the deck. Another huge buff was Jirachi, a bench sitter that prevented Sablei's Lost Mine attack from hitting benched Pokemon. With Lost Box being a problematic matchup, this was a huge buff for a deck like Gardevoir that could struggle with it. However, Gardevoir also received a new attacker in this set, Screamtail. Roaring Scream does 20 damage for 1 psychic and a colorless energy to one of your opponent's Pokemon, but for each damage counter on Screamtail. With Psychic Embrace, this was very easy to power up, and with Bravery Charm or a Hero's Cape, you could scale up to hit big numbers while also being able to snipe and pick off low HP Pokemon before they evolved like Ralts or Charmander. This has been a staple in the deck for years, and is one of the most terrifying attackers in the game at times. Gardevoir was better than ever with these buffs, winning Knoxville Regionals and placing highly at every event for the rest of the format, despite the additions of new and threatening attackers in the form of Iron Hands EX and Roaring Moon EX in the same set. However, in April 2024, rotation happened, and Gardevoir lost some of his best tools. Shining Arcana, Zacian V, and Mirage Step Kirlia were gone. This was devastating, since Shining Arcana and Zacian were the main ways to take one-hit knockouts. However, as will become a trend later, the Gardevoir players adapted. They added multiple copies of Bravery Charm, and leaned heavily into Screamtail and Drifloon as their big attackers. Temporal Forces, the set that followed the rotation, also added some new tools for Gardevoir in the form of Fluttermane, a staple in the deck for years with its great ability and consistent damage output, and Hero's Cape, an A-Spec tool card that synergized well with every Pokemon in the deck, and it could even allow Gardevoir EX to survive a minimum power Burning Darkness from Charizard. This Gardevoir list placed 3rd at the Orlando Regionals, the first event of this new format. Very respectable for a deck that lost so much the same day. However, despite some more decent placements, Gardevoir was actually struggling a little. There were none in the top 8 at Indianapolis Regionals, and a few weeks later, the same was the case at Stockholm. This truly looked like the first time that Gardevoir could bleed, but not for long. As in the next set, Twilight Masquerade, the expansion right before NAIC, Gardevoir would receive the single biggest buff it could have asked for. A Pokemon that went on to not just dominate the game, appearing in just about every archetype, it's also a Pokemon that has established itself as one of the greatest of all time. Munkidori. Believe it or not, players actually thought Munkidori was quite bad when it first released.
Munkidori is a basic psychic Pokemon with the Adrenaline Power ability, which allows you to move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. That's awesome, except you can only use that if you have a Darkness Energy attached to your Munkidori. That's terrible. It's funny how just that little requirement can turn ability from being awesome to terrible, just like that. A card like Radiant Alakazam is just better for manipulating damage. Yeah, you don't get to move damage from your guys to your opponent's guys with Radiant Alakazam, but at least you don't have to attach a Darkness Energy to it in order to use the ability. Your energy attachment for turn is such a valuable resource. Wasting your energy attachment for turn by attaching a Darkness Energy to Munkidori just seems like not worth it. 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 Just seems like not worth it.
As Andrew Mahone explains, Munkidori is a basic psychic Pokemon with the ability Adrenabrain that moves 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponents, as long as Munkidori has a Dark Energy attached. I'm thinking about making a full video dedicated to just Munkidori, so if you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments down below. While you're there, you should subscribe. Anyways, Munkidori slotted in perfectly in Gardevoir, since Gardevoir didn't rely on turn attachments to power up his attackers, meaning you could afford to attach Dark Energy to Munkidori for even just a single turn. And Munkidori was invaluable at removing damage placed via Psychic Embrace on Pokemon that you didn't really want damage on, such as your Gardevoir EX after you attached to attack with it or after you retreated it. This combo is undeniable, but it wasn't always that way. At least until NAIC results dropped, and Gardevoir didn't just do good. It took 6 of the top 8 slots, including 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It was clear that Munkidori was not only a massive upgrade for the deck, but literally mandatory for the deck to succeed in the future. However, NAIC was the only tournament in this format, and the next set, Shrouded Fable, which released right before Worlds 2024, was a true game changer. Fezandipiti EX is, in my opinion, the best Pokemon in the TCG, and it has been since the day of its release. Its ability to draw cards consistently on a basic, high HP Pokemon is more than incredible, and despite Gardevoir not playing the card initially because of how strong Refinement Kirlia was, it would eventually become a staple in the deck. It also added Night Stretcher, a much more versatile recovery card than Super Rod, and one that became a staple of the Gardevoir deck since day one as well. However, Shrouded Fable was overall more negative than positive for Gardevoir at the time, mostly due to the meta. You see, with the release of so many powerful dragon attackers like Dragapult EX, and now Kyurem, a dragon type with one of the most devastating attacks of all time, and the release of Teal Mask Ogerpon EX in Twilight Masquerade, Regidrago V-Star rose from the ashes and became a tier 1 deck, ultimately dominating the World Championships. This was an especially problematic matchup for Gardevoir, who relied on a slow, evolving setup to succeed, while Kyurem and the combination of canceling Cologne and Prime Catcher made it almost impossible to set up some games, let alone win. Dusknoir also released in this set, and has been a nightmare for Gardevoir players ever since, due to it skewing the prize trade and picking off evolving decks before they could respond. Charizard rose due to this, another poor matchup for Gardevoir. So despite a dominant showing at NAIC, it actually didn't do as good, even close to as good, especially at Worlds. It placed 12th and 32nd. Respectable results to be sure, but for a deck that dominated the prior format, it was clear that Shrouded Fable was more than troubling for this once great archetype. However, it wouldn't remain a once great archetype for too long. Baltimore Regionals was in the same format as Worlds, and against all odds, Gardevoir won. Henry Chow won his first of 3 regionals with a Turbo Gardevoir list to combat the faster metagame. If you want more info on this, go watch my previous video where I go a bit more in depth. Anyways, Gardevoir was back on the map, and despite a sketchy Drago matchup and a bad Charizard matchup, it was still a deck that always went on a deep run. However, the next set, Stellar Crown, only made the meta more hostile for Gardevoir. Lugia was better than it had been in years, Regidrago was still everywhere, and Charizard and Lost Box were making resurgences. Gardevoir just didn't have a good place in this metagame, to be honest. It bombed so bad at Louisville that many players considered it a B tier deck, maybe even as low as C tier, as with poor matchup spreads, it just was not a great play to tournaments at this time unless you were both really good at the deck and got pretty lucky with matchups during the tournament. This was such a big ask that it stopped Gardevoir making top cuts consistently at majors for the rest of the Stellar Crown format, occasionally going on a deep run. However, it got top 8 at LAIC, but after that and before that, it just wasn't finding a place in the meta. Unfortunately, Regidrago was everywhere. And although that wouldn't change with the release of Searching Sparks and more Regidrago support, Gardevoir did much better in this format, although there weren't any insanely massive developments. Players tried the new Precious Trolley Ace spec and Call Bell items that placed top 4 at an event, but it never found a good home there, as another Ace spec like Unfair Stamp was almost always better and Call Bell was too gimmicky. It won Perth Regionals, top 16 to 3 events in a row, and won San Antonio when Henry Chow shocked the world with another miracle run. He played Moonlit Hill, an uncommon inclusion, as well as Mawile and Irida, and only one Bravery Charm, all somewhat abnormalities from popular lists. Gardevoir was back, despite an unfavored matchup into some of the best decks in the game. Good players found success with it regardless. However, the next set, Prismatic Evolution, would put Gardevoir in territory that possibly no deck could ever reach. Badoo was the standout card from this set. Itchy Pollen does 10 damage and item locks for 0 energy. and despite its pitiful 30 HP, Free Retreat and Splash ability made this a prominent force in the meta. It single-handedly revived Dragapult EX, a deck that could abuse Badoo itself and play through it just fine with the incredible supporter card Lance. Gardevoir also thrived in this meta. With Regidrago and Charizard both being phased out of the meta by the flower, there was practically nothing holding Gardevoir back. It could either use Badoo itself or play through it, or both, since Refinement Kirlia and TM Evolution worked through a Badoo lock. Gardevoir became tier 1 again, and was there to stay. Although it didn't perform incredible at EUIC due to the surge in Goldango right before the tournament, it got top 8 at Merida and got second at Fortaleza right before it won Stockholm. It got top 4 at Brisbane, but suddenly, right after that, everything changed. The rotation of the F block of cards took effect in April 2025, and with it, Gardevoir looked like it was finally dead for good. And I mean it. Refinement Kirlia, Radiant Greninja, and Mawile were gone, and all of these had been staples of the deck at some point. This was devastating for Gardevoir, as Refinement Kirlia was the entire deck engine and playstyle, and it defined the deck for its entire life. However, that was pretty much all it lost. And although devastating, rotation also did some good for Gardevoir too. Lugia V-Star was always a tricky matchup, with Gardevoir usually having to tech for it, and that was actually now gone. With its losses to rotation, Miraidon would be dead for a while, meaning Gardevoir didn't have to worry much about Iron Hands EX. Charizard was still bad, and Regidrago rotated out as well. So on paper, the only bad matchup for Gardevoir was Goldango. Atlanta Regionals was the first tournament of this new format and the largest regional of all time. Dragapult usage was through the roof, and Journey Together, the new set, added the perfect card for Gardevoir to counter it. Lily's Clefairy EX has the Fairy Zone ability, turning the weakness of Dragon-type Pokemon into Psychic. This made Gardevoir EX able to one-shot a Dragapult EX while maintaining a stable board state, something that the decks like Raging Bolt could struggle with. Monkey Dory was still broken, and with the meta not revolving around it quite yet, Gardevoir could freely abuse it to its full power. The Gardevoir players at Atlanta knew that if they could either dodge or outplay Goldango and build a consistent list, they could have a deep run. And have a deep run would be an understatement. Henry Chow did the impossible and won yet another regional with Gardevoir, with a very unorthodox End Zoroark build to replace the Refinement Kirlia.
I don't know if I take that bet. Professor's research, 7 cards, victory or defeat.
1, 2, 3, there's one. There's the rare
Ultra
candy.
Ball rare candy.
Oh my
Night
god,
Stretcher.
there's the Night Stretcher. No way.
He has it all, folks. Pablo, lay it down for them. The Ultra Ball for Gardevoir EX. Rare Candy evolves the Ralts. Night Stretcher to get Lily's Clefairy back for Fairy Zone.
He has double Night Stretcher. One Gardevoir EX was discarded. He doesn't even need to Ultra Ball. He has it. Andrew, I think, is explaining to Henry how he has it. There we go. Rare Candy, Gardevoir, Night Stretcher for the Lily's Clefairy EX. Full Moon Rondo. Oh, wait, I guess we need enough basic Pokemon. Oh no, we power up the Gardevoir EX.
Yes,
Gardevoir EX does enough damage to knock out the Dragapult EX now that it is weak to Psychic. And Henry Chow will be the Atlanta regional champion.
Looking through the discard pile, he had the Earthen Vessel as well to make sure that these energies were in the discard pile.
Wow,
And there's the win! Henry Chow, monumental plot armor. 3-time regional champion in one season.
This proved that Gardevoir could still work, now using Pheasantipity and heavy draw support accounts of Iono and Research to provide the draw power that Refinement once did. Gardevoir then won the next 3 majors in a row. Yes, 4 major wins in a row for the same deck. Brent Tonneson from Australia won Monterey Regionals with a Gardevoir list that became known as the Brixty, arguably the most iconic Gardevoir list of the post-rotation format. And Brent also won Melbourne Regionals with the same list. However, it was William Azevedo who won Santiago Regionals with a heavy TM Evolution Arven build of Gardevoir that truly found gold. Decks like End Zoroark and Terrabox went ham in this format due to Manaphy's bench protection being rotated. However, like always, Gardevoir adapted. Henry Chow and Michael Davison played this 60 to Portland with a 1-1 Rabskull line to not only help versus Dragapult, Zoroark, and Terrabox, meaning your only bad matchup was Goldango, but also meant you could abuse TM Evo to get Kirlia out as soon as possible meaning you could skip Rare Candy some games. However, you still had a bad Gholdengo matchup no matter which way you sliced it. However, Gholdengo was on the down, with Ace Nullifier Genesect rising hard, which countered Gholdengo, meaning Gardevoir didn't have to worry as much about it. It's funny to me how Gholdengo, the only thing that could keep Gardevoir in check consistently, was actively being crept out of the meta by the decks that lost to Gardevoir like Dragapult and Joltik. I just find it hilarious how Gardevoir was seen as the ultimate threat, but when push came to shove, players decided to tech for Gholdengo instead of Gardevoir. Anyways, Henry Chow and Michael Davidson did so good at this event with a TM Evo based Guardy list that they did the unthinkable. Met each other in the finals with the exact same 60 cards. This is unprecedented, and Michael Davidson ultimately won the tournament this time, but Henry Chow came oh so close to 4 regional wins with the same deck in the same season. Still, Gardevoir was the undisputed best deck in the format for the entirety of the Journey Together format. However, the next set, Destined Rivals, introduced a deck that looked to have a positive Gardevoir matchup while actually being, a strong deck. Grimmsnarl. Marnie's Grimmsnarl with the Frostlass Monkey Dory Badoo package were a perfect fit, and did extremely well at the Champions League tournament right before NAIC. The first tournament Grim would be legal for. Players were teching for it hard. Picnic Basket, Iron Leaf ZX, and grass coverage began to spike, but Gardevoir was seen as in a worse spot now, since on paper Grimmsnarl should destroy Gardevoir like Charizard did. But the matchup was actually pretty close. If played well, the variance in win rate is only usually about 5% at most, despite Grim being favored. This was because of the tech cards included in the deck. However, most Grimmsnarl players just assumed the matchup was perfectly fine for them, and this gave Gardevoir players the upper hand once again. Isaiah Bradner, Henry Chow, and several other top American players teamed up to create the ultimate NAIC Gardevoir list. 1 Bravery Charm, 4 Monkey Dory, 4 Dark Energy, and TM Turbo Energize to get Dark Energies on Monkey Dory as fast as possible. This flipped the Grimmsnarl matchup by a lot, since whoever got more Monkey Dory set up was in a better spot to win the game usually. Isaiah Bradner ended up winning the entire tournament, and with Gardevoir winning the largest tournament ever, it became undeniable just what we were witnessing. In just a few months, Gardevoir went from dead in the water and washed to the undisputed best deck in the game. It's totally unprecedented for a deck to lose this much to rotation and still dominate. However, we still hadn't seen the peak yet. Heading into the World Championships, Black Bolt and White Flare released, and Gholdengo EX was the standout archetype of this format. Genesect EX made the deck way better and more consistent, and Gholdengo decks dominated online tournaments, did decent at the Champions Leagues in Japan, and ultimately made up almost a quarter of all decks at the World Championships. However, Gardevoir also received a few potential buffs in this set as well. Frillish is a basic 80 HP Pokemon that item locks for 1 Psychic Energy, doing 20 damage. This evolves into Jellicent EX, which item locks while it's in the active spot and prevents tools from being played, although it does do a pretty pitiful 160 for 4 energy or 80 for 2 energy. A lot of players didn't know if this would be a buff right away, but it ultimately didn't matter because the Gardevoir deck that ended up, I repeat, winning the World Championships didn't play Jellicent or Frillish at all. Instead, Riley McKay, who faced Isaiah Bradner in the finals of NAIC, brought a list with Fluttermane to turn off Gholdengo's active coin bonus, and TM Devo in order to set up for a play where you eliminate all of Gholdengo's draw power by TM Devoing and leaving the guy in the active spot with no ability. This made Riley actually pretty decent into Gholdengo. Riley McKay brought this Gardevoir list to the World Championships, did pretty good in day 1, and barely made it into the top cut, ultimately in asymmetrical. He ended up getting into the top 8 and faced against Oven Schvinhund, one of the best Charizard players in the world. Charizard wasn't actually that good of a deck for this tournament, as it takes a really rough matchup into Dragapult, but it does have a good Gardevoir matchup, so everyone, including myself, was writing Riley off. Unbelievably though, Riley beat the Charizard and made it to the top 4, where he destroyed a Raging Bolt on stream to make the finals. In the finals, it was a repeat of Atlanta all over again. Gardevoir versus Dragapult Dusknoir. And Gardevoir, just like it had a few months ago, ended up on top.
He's ready to just give up the game. It's over.
That is history made in the 2025 season here at the Masters Finals. Riley McKay is taking things down with Gardevoir EX.
It lost so much over the years to rotation that Pokemon kept printing new support for it to replace the old. Think about it. Screamtail, Drifloon, Lily's Clefairy, Munkidori, Jellicent, Frillish, and now Mega Gardevoir EX and Mystery Garden next month. Anyways, I think it's time to reveal why Gardevoir never dies. It's twofold in my opinion. Well, my best guess is that they think Gardevoir actually needs the buffs to survive in these new formats. However, they usually overestimate and then they never correct the buffs like they did with Mew VMAX. Instead, they buff it in the same set that they add a new threatening archetype that they predict will creep Gardevoir out of the meta, and then the cycle repeats with Gardevoir surviving. As for the second reason, it's actually quite simple. Good players play the deck, and by good players, I mean the top tier. Guys like Henry Chow, Riley McKay, Isaiah Bradner, Tord Reklev, and countless others who've put their blood, sweat, and tears into this archetype. They've mastered this deck to the point that they can play against virtually anything and still find success. Riley literally beat Charizard on his way to winning Worlds, a presumed to be abysmal matchup. But he did it, because Gardevoir can do it all. So long as they have their way, Gardevoir EX isn't going anywhere. And for all we know, it might be going even further still, possibly until it reaches the rare territory where it goes down as the greatest deck of all time. Thanks for watching. You might notice the gameplay is different for this video than past ones, so let me know what you think in the comments. Also, let me know what you think of Gardevoir. Anyways, take care, have a good one, bye.